The surveillance camera footage from the upscale Coral Gables restaurant that would destroy Michael Turner's carefully reconstructed world showed his supposedly deceased wife, Nadine Laurent, laughing intimately with Robert Turner, his own stepfather, as they shared champagne and anniversary cake, celebrating what appeared to be their second wedding anniversary. 6 years after Nadine had supposedly died in a devastating car accident that had left Michael a broken widower who spent every day mourning the woman he believed had been the love of his life, taken from him far too soon in a tragedy that had shattered his faith in happiness and future possibilities. The shock of discovery was so complete and disorienting that Michael initially questioned his own sanity rather than accepting the evidence before his eyes, as the woman whose funeral he had organized, whose grave he visited weekly, and whose memory had prevented him from considering romantic relationships for over 2,000 days, sat mere tables away from him, displaying the same radiant smile and infectious laughter that had captivated him during their courtship in Port-au-Prince 7 years earlier, when her nursing school ambitions and dreams of building a medical career in America had seemed perfectly aligned with his desire to help someone achieve their potential while building a cross-cultural marriage that honored both their backgrounds. The investigation that Michael had personally commissioned into the circumstances of Nadine's death had concluded with official confirmation that her rental car had plunged off a bridge during Hurricane Isabel's aftermath, with rescue teams recovering only personal belongings and vehicle fragments that had been sufficient for death certification, despite the absence of human remains that authorities attributed to strong currents and marine life activity commonly prevented body recovery in South Florida's treacherous coastal waters during severe weather events. The grief counseling that had consumed 3 years of Michael's existence had focused on helping him process not only the devastating loss of his wife, but also the traumatic circumstances of her death during a humanitarian trip to Haiti, where she had been delivering medical supplies to earthquake victims, transforming her from beloved partner into martyred saint whose memory demanded perpetual devotion and prevented him from considering the possibility that other relationships could provide meaning and companionship without dishonoring their love. The memorial foundation that Michael had established using Nadine's life insurance settlement had provided medical scholarships for Haitian nursing students, reflecting her passion for healthcare development and international humanitarian work that had brought them together when he had volunteered for a medical mission where her translation skills and cultural knowledge had been essential for establishing trust with communities that had been devastated by natural disasters and political instability. The family dynamics that had complicated Michael's grieving process included his complicated relationship with Robert Turner, the retired military officer who had married his mother Elaine when Michael was 12 and had maintained an authoritative presence that created ongoing tension through demands for emotional strength and criticism of what he considered excessive mourning that prevented Michael from moving forward with practical life decisions, including career advancement and romantic relationships. The financial arrangements that had followed Nadine's supposed death included not only insurance settlements, but also the sale of their shared home and belongings that held too many painful memories, with Michael moving into a smaller apartment that reflected his psychological withdrawal from social activities and his transformation from an optimistic real estate professional into someone whose emotional life remained frozen in the past, while his career suffered from inability to maintain the enthusiasm and networking skills that had previously driven his success. The annual memorial services that Michael organized each year on the anniversary of Nadine's supposed death had become sacred rituals that provided structure for his grief, while also maintaining connections to the Haitian American community that had embraced their marriage as a symbol of successful cultural integration and mutual respect between communities that often struggled with economic and social barriers that prevented authentic cross-cultural relationship building. The psychological state that Michael had reached after 6 years of mourning reflected complete emotional investment in preserving Nadine's memory through charitable work, refusal to consider romantic relationships, and dedication to maintaining their shared apartment exactly as she had left it, with personal belongings, photographs, and cultural artifacts that served as shrine to their love, while also preventing him from processing loss and moving towards psychological healing that might enable future happiness. The discovery that would force Michael to confront the devastating reality that his grief had been manufactured through systematic deception began when Detective Carla Morris contacted him about irregularities in financial records related to Nadine's insurance claims, leading to surveillance activities that revealed not only her survival, but also her intimate relationship with the man who had been present at every family gathering where Michael's prolonged mourning had been discussed and criticized as excessive attachment to someone who could never return. The love story that had captivated Miami's Haitian American community began during a medical mission to Port-au-Prince, where Michael Turner's real estate expertise had been volunteered for housing reconstruction and projects, while Nadine Laurent's nursing education and fluent bilingual abilities had made her an indispensable liaison between American volunteers and earthquake survivors who needed medical care but remained suspicious of foreign interventions that had previously failed to provide sustained assistance or genuine respect for Haitian culture and dignity. The initial attraction between Michael and Nadine had developed through shared work on establishing temporary medical clinics in devastated neighborhoods, where her compassion for suffering patients and her ability to maintain hope despite overwhelming challenges had inspired his admiration, while her beauty and intelligence had awakened romantic feelings that seemed inappropriate given the humanitarian context, but gradually evolved into genuine emotional connection that transcended cultural and economic differences. The courtship that followed Michael's return to Miami had required extensive international travel and communication, as Nadine completed her nursing program while he provided financial support for her education and immigration process that would enable her eventual relocation to the United States, where they could build a life together that honored both her professional aspirations and their shared commitment to serving Haiti's medical needs through charitable work and cultural bridge building. The immigration process that brought Nadine to America had been complicated by bureaucratic requirements and documentation challenges that tested their patience, while also strengthening their relationship through shared struggle against systemic barriers that seemed designed to prevent love from transcending national boundaries, creating bonds of mutual support and determination that made their eventual marriage seem like victory over forces that had attempted to keep them apart. The wedding celebration that took place in Miami's Little Haiti district had been a joyous fusion of American and Haitian traditions, with ceremonies that honored both cultures while creating new rituals that reflected their commitment to building a marriage that would serve as a model for other cross-cultural couples seeking to maintain their heritage while embracing opportunities available through international partnership and shared life goals. The early months of their marriage had validated their optimistic expectations about cross-cultural compatibility as Nadine adapted to American healthcare systems while maintaining connections to Haiti through volunteer work, and Michael embraced Haitian cultural traditions while supporting her professional development through financial assistance and networking connections that helped her establish credentials and employment in Miami's competitive medical environment. The challenges that gradually emerged in their relationship reflected normal adjustment difficulties, as Nadine struggled with cultural isolation and language barriers that made professional advancement difficult, while Michael grappled with family tensions created by Robert Turner's disapproval of their marriage and his criticism of financial resources being devoted to supporting someone whose ultimate commitment to America and their family remained uncertain in his military-trained perspective. The business opportunities that Michael pursued to support Nadine's career goals included real estate investments that would provide passive income while also funding her continuing education and certification programs required for practicing nursing in Florida, creating financial pressure that strained their budget while also demonstrating his commitment to her professional success and their shared future in America. The family integration that proved most challenging involved Robert Turner's persistent questioning of Nadine's motivations and background, with subtle but consistent suggestions that she was using their marriage for immigration advantages rather than genuine love, creating household tension during family gatherings where his military experience and authoritative personality dominated conversations and made Nadine feel unwelcome and judged, despite Michael's efforts to protect and support her. The cultural adaptation that Nadine experienced included not only language and professional challenges but also social isolation from extended family and friends in Haiti, who had initially supported her American marriage but gradually became distant as her new life created barriers to maintaining previous relationships and cultural connections that had provided identity and emotional support throughout her childhood and education. The financial pressures that developed in their marriage reflected both Michael's investment in Nadine's career development and the economic realities of supporting someone whose foreign credentials required extensive retraining and certification processes that delayed her ability to contribute household income while also creating stress about long-term financial planning and stability that could support their dreams of eventually establishing medical charitable work in Haiti. The final months before Nadine's supposed death had been characterized by increasing tension about her career advancement, family acceptance, and their ability to balance American opportunities with Haitian obligations. Though Michael had attributed these difficulties to normal adjustment challenges rather than fundamental problems that might threaten their marriage or indicate deeper dissatisfaction with their life together and future possibilities. This shocking story reveals how the people closest to us can harbor the darkest secrets and most devastating betrayals. If you want to uncover more cases of family deception and manipulation that destroy lives and tear apart the bonds we hold most sacred, subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. Because sometimes the greatest enemy isn't a stranger, it's someone who shares your last name. The humanitarian trip to Haiti that would supposedly claim Nadine Laurent's life had been planned as a routine medical supply delivery organized through the Miami-based Haitian Relief Network, where Nadine's language skills and cultural knowledge made her an invaluable coordinator for establishing relationships with local healthcare providers, who could ensure that donated equipment and medications reached communities had been devastated by both natural disasters and ongoing political instability that prevented effective distribution of international aid. The departure from Miami International Airport had been emotional but routine, with Michael accompanying Nadine to her gate while she expressed excitement about returning to Port-au-Prince to work with medical professionals who had inspired her original nursing career aspirations, though she also acknowledged anxiety about witnessing the continued suffering of communities that had struggled with poverty and infrastructure challenges that seemed to worsen despite years of international assistance and development efforts. The communication during Nadine's first week in Haiti had been regular and affectionate, with daily phone calls and text messages that described her activities coordinating supply distribution, while also updating Michael about her visits with former classmates and family members who remained in Port-au-Prince despite economic hardships that had motivated many educated Haitians to emigrate to America or other countries, offering better opportunities for professional development. The final conversation between Michael and Nadine had taken place on a Thursday evening when she had described successful delivery of medical equipment to a rural clinic, while also expressing homesickness and eagerness to return to Miami, where their life together provided stability and hope that contrasted dramatically with the overwhelming challenges facing Haiti's healthcare system and the persistent poverty that prevented meaningful progress despite good intentions and generous donations from international supporters. The notification of Nadine's death had arrived through a phone call from the American Embassy in Port-au-Prince, where consular officials had explained that her rental car had been found in a ravine following Hurricane Isabel's passage through the region, with rescue teams recovering personal belongings and vehicle identification that confirmed her presence, but finding no human remains due to dangerous conditions that had prevented immediate search efforts and subsequent environmental factors that had eliminated physical evidence. The investigation that followed Nadine's disappearance had been complicated by Haiti's limited forensic capabilities and the chaos created by hurricane damage that had disrupted communication systems and emergency response protocols, leading American authorities to accept local officials' conclusions about accidental death, despite the absence of definitive proof that might have been available under normal circumstances and in locations with more sophisticated investigative resources. The grief that consumed Michael following official confirmation of Nadine's death was compounded by geographical distance from the accident scene, cultural barriers that complicated communication with Haitian authorities, and language difficulties that prevented him from fully understanding investigation procedures or advocating for more intensive search efforts that might have provided definitive answers about the circumstances of her disappearance. The funeral arrangements that Michael organized in Miami reflected both his need for closure and the community's desire to honor Nadine's memory, with services that celebrated her humanitarian work, while also providing emotional support for friends and family members who had been inspired by her dedication to serving Haiti's medical needs despite personal risks and professional challenges that would have discouraged less committed individuals. The insurance settlement that followed Nadine's death had been processed efficiently despite the absence of physical remains, with companies accepting official death certificates and embassy documentation that satisfied legal requirements for processing claims, while also enabling Michael to establish the memorial foundation that would continue her charitable work through providing educational opportunities for aspiring Haitian healthcare professionals. The family dynamics that emerged during Michael's grieving process included both supportive elements from his mother Elaine and critical pressure from Robert Turner, who had initially expressed appropriate sympathy, but gradually became impatient with what he considered excessive mourning that prevented Michael from accepting reality and moving forward with practical life decisions, including career advancement and potential romantic relationships. The community support that sustained Michael during his darkest periods included connections to Miami's Haitian American organizations, where Nadine's memory was honored through continued humanitarian work, though his prolonged grief gradually created social awkwardness as friends and colleagues struggled to provide appropriate support, while also encouraging him to consider healing approaches that might enable him to rebuild his emotional life and professional effectiveness. The memorial rituals that Michael developed included weekly visits to the cemetery where Nadine's memorial stone had been placed, despite the absence of physical remains, annual trips to Haiti, where he continued her humanitarian work through the foundation that bore her name, and preservation of their shared apartment as a shrine that maintained her presence, while also preventing him from processing loss and moving towards psychological recovery. The financial irregularities that would eventually expose Nadine Laurent's deception began to surface during a routine audit of insurance claims related to Hurricane Isabel's casualties, when Detective Carla Morris of the Miami Police Department's Fraud Division noticed discrepancies in documentation and timeline inconsistencies that suggested potential manipulation of official records rather than straightforward accidental death in circumstances that had claimed multiple victims during the storm's devastating passage through Haiti. The investigation that Detective Morris initiated focused on verifying the authenticity of documents that had been used to support Nadine's death certification, including embassy reports, local police statements, and medical examiner conclusions that had been accepted by insurance companies despite being based on limited physical evidence and testimony from sources whose reliability could not be independently verified through standard American law enforcement procedures. The surveillance activities that emerged from the fraud investigation had initially focused on identifying potential accomplices who might have assisted in document falsification, but expanded to include monitoring of financial accounts and property records that revealed suspicious patterns of activity continuing for years after Nadine's supposed death, suggesting either identity theft or systematic deception that extended far beyond insurance fraud into comprehensive life reconstruction. The breakthrough that transformed the investigation occurred when Detective Morris identified credit card transactions and utility payments that indicated someone using Nadine's personal information had been living in Florida throughout the period when she was supposedly dead, leading to enhanced surveillance that revealed not only her survival, but also her intimate relationship with Robert Turner, in circumstances that suggested long-term planning rather than spontaneous deception. The surveillance footage that captured Nadine and Robert Turner together had been obtained from multiple locations, including restaurants, shopping centers, and residential areas, where they appeared as an established couple whose behavior suggested comfort and familiarity that could only have developed through extensive contact over a period of years, rather than recent acquaintance that might have explained innocent circumstances for their relationship. The financial analysis that revealed the scope of their deception included documentation of joint bank accounts, shared property investments, and coordinated financial activities that demonstrated systematic collaboration in maintaining Nadine's false death, while also profiting from insurance settlements and other benefits that had been obtained through fraudulent representation of circumstances that had never actually occurred. The communication evidence that investigators recovered from electronic devices revealed extensive correspondence between Nadine and Robert Turner that predated her supposed death by several months, including discussions about escape plans, identity concealment techniques, and strategies for maintaining their relationship while avoiding detection by family members and law enforcement agencies that might investigate suspicious circumstances. The confrontation that Detective Morris arranged between the surveillance evidence and official records created undeniable proof of systematic deception that had involved multiple criminal violations, including insurance fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to deceive governmental authorities responsible for death certification and legal documentation that had been manipulated to support false narratives about Hurricane Isabel casualties. The jurisdiction complications that arose from the international elements of the case required coordination between Miami police, federal authorities responsible for immigration fraud, and Haitian officials who needed to verify their participation in document falsification that had enabled Nadine's disappearance and subsequent identity reconstruction in circumstances that suggested either corruption or incompetence in official procedures. The impact on Michael Turner was devastating, as Detective Morris presented evidence that not only proved Nadine's survival, but also revealed the intimate relationship with his stepfather that had been developing during the entire period of his mourning, creating psychological trauma that combined betrayal by his wife with family destruction caused by Robert Turner's systematic exploitation of his grief and emotional vulnerability. The legal implications of the discovery extended beyond individual criminal charges to include questions about the validity of insurance settlements, the authenticity of memorial foundation activities, and potential civil liability for emotional distress caused by systematic deception that had exploited Michael's love and trust, while also manipulating community sympathy and charitable donations obtained through fraudulent representation. The preparation for confronting both Nadine and Robert Turner required careful coordination between law enforcement agencies and victim support services that could provide assistance for Michael as he processed not only the criminal elements of their deception, but also the personal betrayal that had destroyed his understanding of love, family loyalty, and the reliability of people who had been central to his emotional and social support systems. The confrontation that shattered 6 years of carefully maintained deception took place at the Coral Gables restaurant, where Michael Turner, accompanied by Detective Carla Morris and armed with months of surveillance evidence, approached the intimate anniversary dinner where Nadine Laurent and Robert Turner were celebrating what appeared to be their second wedding anniversary with champagne, expensive jewelry, and the casual affection of a couple whose relationship had been built on the foundation of Michael's manufactured grief and emotional destruction. The recognition that flickered across Nadine's face when she saw Michael approaching their table was immediately followed by calculation rather than surprise, suggesting that she had been prepared for potential discovery and had developed psychological defenses for the confrontation that would force her to address years of criminal deception while sitting beside the man who had been present at every family gathering where Michael's prolonged mourning had been discussed and criticized. The explanation that Nadine attempted to provide for her staged death combined claims about feeling trapped by cultural expectations and marriage pressures with assertions about discovering fundamental incompatibilities that made their relationship unbearable. Though her justifications seemed rehearsed rather than spontaneous emotional revelations, while Robert Turner remained silent and avoided eye contact with his stepson, whose life had been systematically destroyed through their collaboration. The manipulation tactics that both Nadine and Robert Turner employed during the confrontation included attempts to blame Michael for creating conditions that had forced their desperate deception, suggestions that cultural differences and family tensions had been more problematic than anyone had recognized, and claims that their relationship had developed innocently after Nadine's supposed death, rather than being the motivation for elaborate criminal conspiracy. The evidence that Detective Morris presented during the confrontation included financial records documenting years of joint activities, communication logs revealing extensive pre-planning, and surveillance footage that demonstrated the intimate nature of their relationship while Michael had been mourning someone he believed was dead, creating undeniable proof of systematic deception that had exploited his love and trust for criminal purposes. The psychological state that Robert Turner revealed during the confrontation reflected years of resentment about Michael's emotional attachment to Nadine and his jealousy about their marriage, combined with opportunistic exploitation of circumstances that had enabled him to pursue a relationship with someone he had desired since her arrival in their family circle, but had been unable to approach while she was married to his stepson. The financial crimes that their deception had involved extended beyond insurance fraud to include tax evasion, identity theft, and property fraud that had enabled them to maintain comfortable lifestyles, while Michael struggled with grief and economic consequences of charitable donations made using fraudulent insurance settlements that should never have been processed or distributed. The impact on Elaine Turner was immediate and devastating, as she witnessed not only her husband's betrayal, but also her son's psychological collapse when confronted with evidence that his 6 years of mourning had been manufactured through systematic criminal activity that had exploited his most vulnerable emotions while destroying his capacity for trust and authentic relationships. The legal consequences that both Nadine and Robert Turner faced included multiple felony charges for conspiracy, fraud, and identity theft that could result in significant prison sentences, while also creating civil liability for emotional distress and financial damages that had resulted from their systematic deception and exploitation of Michael's grief and community sympathy that had been generated through false representation. The community reaction to the discovery of their deception created shockwaves throughout Miami's Haitian American organizations and real estate professional networks, where Michael's dedication to Nadine's memory had been respected and admired, leading to questions about the authenticity of charitable activities and memorial services that had been based on fraudulent representation of circumstances that had never actually occurred. The jurisdictional complications that emerged from the international elements of their crimes required coordination between multiple law enforcement agencies responsible for investigating insurance fraud, immigration violations, and conspiracy charges that had been committed across state and national boundaries, while also involving corrupt documentation from Haitian officials who had participated in the deception. The psychological evaluation that would later be required for legal proceedings revealed personality disorders in both Nadine and Robert Turner that explained their ability to maintain intimate relationships while systematically exploiting someone's trust and grief, including narcissistic and antisocial traits that had enabled them to view Michael's suffering as acceptable collateral damage for their personal happiness and financial gain. The criminal investigation that followed the restaurant confrontation required extensive coordination between local, federal, and international law enforcement agencies, as the scope of Nadine Laurent and Robert Turner's deception became clear through analysis of financial records, communication evidence, and fraudulent documentation that had enabled them to maintain their criminal conspiracy for over 6 years, while systematically exploiting Michael's grief and community sympathy for personal and financial benefit. The evidence collection process revealed the sophisticated nature of their deception, including falsified Haitian government documents, corrupted embassy communications, and manipulated insurance company investigations that had required coordination with officials in multiple countries and institutions to create the comprehensive false narrative that had enabled Nadine's disappearance and subsequent identity reconstruction without detection by authorities or family members. The financial analysis conducted by forensic accountants documented over $400,000 in fraudulent insurance settlements, charitable donations, and community contributions that had been obtained through false representation of Nadine's death and Michael's widower status, creating criminal liability for grand theft and fraud that extended beyond individual victimization to include exploitation of charitable organizations and community trust. The psychological evaluation of Robert Turner revealed disturbing patterns of manipulation and opportunistic exploitation that extended throughout his relationship with the Turner family, including evidence that he had been planning to exploit Nadine's immigration status and marriage difficulties long before her supposed death, suggesting systematic predatory behavior rather than spontaneous response to unexpected romantic attraction. The testimony that Michael provided about his relationship with Nadine and the impact of her supposed death was essential for establishing the human cost of their crimes, while also demonstrating the systematic nature of psychological manipulation that had prevented him from healing or moving forward with his life, while they profited from his continued mourning and emotional isolation. The international cooperation required for investigating the Haitian elements of their deception revealed corruption within local government offices, where officials had been bribed to provide false documentation supporting Nadine's death certificate and accident reports, leading to diplomatic complications and additional criminal charges that extended the case beyond domestic fraud into international conspiracy and government corruption. The victim impact statements prepared by community organizations that had been deceived by their fraudulent charitable activities documented extensive damage to trust and reputation within Miami's Haitian American community, where Nadine's supposed martyrdom had been used to generate sympathy and financial support for causes that had been exploited for personal enrichment rather than legitimate humanitarian purposes. The expert testimony about trauma and grief that was presented during legal proceedings provided crucial context for understanding how Robert Turner and Nadine had systematically exploited Michael's psychological vulnerability, while also explaining the long-term impact of discovering that 6 years of mourning had been based on elaborate criminal deception designed to facilitate their relationship and financial exploitation. The plea negotiations that were attempted by defense attorneys included offers to provide information about additional victims and criminal networks in exchange for reduced sentences, but prosecutors determined that the systematic nature of their deception and the extensive community damage warranted maximum penalties that would deter similar crimes and provide appropriate justice for multiple forms of victimization. The jurisdictional challenges that emerged from the international elements required careful coordination with Haitian authorities who needed to address corruption within their own governmental systems, while also maintaining diplomatic relationships that balance sovereignty concerns with international law enforcement cooperation necessary for pursuing criminals who exploited institutional weaknesses for personal benefit. The media attention that the case attracted brought focus to vulnerabilities in insurance investigation procedures and death certification processes that could be exploited by sophisticated criminals who understood how to manipulate international documentation and official procedures to create false narratives that would withstand routine scrutiny by authorities with limited resources for intensive verification. The policy implications of their crimes led to enhanced verification procedures for international death certificates, improved coordination between insurance companies and law enforcement agencies, and strengthened requirements for documentation that would make similar deception more difficult to achieve and maintain over extended periods without detection by multiple oversight systems and investigative protocols. The trial of Nadine Laurent and Robert Turner began 18 months after their arrest, during which time the Miami community had struggled to process not only the criminal elements of their deception, but also the broader implications for trust within families and organizations that had been manipulated through systematic exploitation of grief, cultural sympathy, and charitable goodwill that had been redirected for personal enrichment rather than legitimate humanitarian purposes. The prosecution's case was methodically constructed around documentary evidence that proved the fraudulent nature of Nadine's death, financial records that demonstrated systematic theft and conspiracy, and expert testimony about psychological manipulation that explained how they had maintained their deception while exploiting Michael's emotional vulnerability and community trust for criminal purposes that had generated substantial, illegal profits. The defense strategy attempted to minimize their culpability by portraying Nadine as a victim of cultural pressures and immigration vulnerabilities who had been manipulated by Robert Turner's superior knowledge of American legal systems, while suggesting that their crimes were motivated by desperation rather than greed, and that the harm to Michael had been unintended consequence rather than deliberate exploitation. The testimony provided by Michael about his marriage to Nadine and the devastating impact of discovering her deception was emotionally powerful, while also establishing the systematic nature of psychological manipulation that had prevented him from healing or rebuilding his life, while they profited from insurance fraud and charitable donations obtained through false representation of tragic circumstances. The expert witnesses who testified about grief counseling and trauma recovery provided essential context for understanding the long-term psychological damage caused by systematic deception involving staged death, while also explaining how their crimes had exploited natural healing processes and prevented Michael from developing healthy coping mechanisms that might have enabled emotional recovery and future relationships. The financial evidence that proved most compelling to jurors included detailed records of luxury purchases, vacation, travel, and property investments that demonstrated how Robert Turner and Nadine had used fraudulent insurance settlements and charitable donations to maintain comfortable lifestyles, while Michael struggled with grief and economic consequences of donating his legitimate inheritance to memorial foundation activities. The international cooperation that had been essential for investigating their crimes was highlighted through testimony from Haitian officials, who described the corruption that had enabled false documentation, American embassy personnel who explained how their procedures had been manipulated, and insurance investigators who detailed the sophisticated techniques used to deceive multiple institutions and oversight systems. The victim impact statements presented by community organizations and individual donors who had been deceived by fraudulent charitable activities provided powerful evidence of the broader damage caused by their crimes, including not only financial losses, but also destruction of trust within charitable networks that had been exploited for personal enrichment rather than legitimate humanitarian purposes. The forensic analysis of communication evidence revealed the calculated nature of their planning and execution, including detailed discussions about maintaining deception, managing Michael's grief to prevent suspicion, and coordinating their criminal activities to avoid detection by law enforcement agencies or family members who might have recognized inconsistencies in their false narratives. The psychological evaluation that was conducted for sentencing purposes revealed personality disorders and criminal thinking patterns that explained how Robert Turner and Nadine had been able to maintain intimate relationships while systematically exploiting trust and grief, including narcissistic and antisocial traits that had enabled them to view their victims' suffering as acceptable costs for their personal happiness and financial gain. The jury deliberation lasted 4 days, as members struggled with complex questions about the relationship between cultural vulnerability and criminal responsibility, the role of family dynamics in enabling systematic deception, and appropriate punishment for crimes that had combined financial fraud with psychological manipulation that had destroyed lives and community trust over extended periods. The unanimous guilty verdicts on all charges reflected the jury's recognition that regardless of cultural factors or family tensions, the systematic nature of Robert Turner and Nadine's deception constituted serious criminal activity that had exploited multiple victims, while also damaging institutional trust and community cohesion that extended far beyond individual victimization to include broader social harm. The sentencing phase of Robert Turner and Nadine Laurent's trial focused on determining appropriate punishment that would reflect both the financial scope of their crimes and the extensive psychological damage they had inflicted on Michael, their families, and the broader community whose trust had been systematically exploited for criminal purposes that had generated substantial illegal profits while destroying lives and charitable organizations that had been manipulated through false representation. Robert Turner received 12 years in federal prison, along with restitution requirements exceeding $500,000 and forfeiture of assets that had been purchased using fraudulent insurance settlements, while also facing additional state charges related to family abuse and exploitation of vulnerable individuals that could extend his incarceration and create permanent barriers to future contact with potential victims. Nadine Laurent received 10 years in federal prison with deportation proceedings scheduled upon completion of her sentence, reflecting both her cooperation with investigators and her status as someone whose immigration vulnerabilities had been exploited by Robert Turner's superior knowledge of American legal systems, though prosecutors emphasized that cultural factors did not excuse systematic criminal behavior that had victimized multiple individuals and organizations. The restitution orders that were imposed included not only repayment of fraudulent insurance settlements, but also compensation for charitable donations that had been misdirected through false representation, emotional distress damages for Michael's prolonged psychological trauma, and administrative costs associated with investigating and prosecuting crimes that had required extensive international cooperation and specialized expertise. The asset forfeiture proceedings that followed their convictions included seizure of property, vehicles, and investments that had been purchased using criminal proceeds, though recovery efforts were complicated by sophisticated money laundering techniques that had been employed to hide stolen funds and legitimate assets that had been commingled with criminal profits over extended periods of systematic deception. The victim advocacy services that were enhanced in response to their case included specialized counseling for individuals who had been deceived by staged deaths or disappearances, legal assistance for navigating complex restitution procedures, and community education programs designed to help potential victims recognize warning signs of systematic deception and exploitation that might target grief and cultural vulnerabilities for criminal purposes. The policy changes that resulted from advocacy efforts included enhanced verification procedures for international death certificates, improved coordination between insurance companies and law enforcement agencies, investigating suspicious claims, and strengthened penalties for crimes involving exploitation of family relationships and cultural trust that targeted vulnerable individuals and charitable organizations for systematic deception and financial theft. The community healing process within Miami's real estate and Haitian American communities involved difficult conversations about recognizing manipulation and exploitation, while also addressing cultural barriers that prevented victims from seeking help when traditional family support systems had been corrupted by criminal activity that exploited trust and cultural obligations for predatory purposes. The international cooperation that had been developed for investigating their crimes continued through ongoing efforts to strengthen documentation verification procedures and prevent similar exploitation of institutional weaknesses that enabled sophisticated criminals to manipulate governmental systems and charitable organizations across international boundaries for systematic fraud and identity theft. The research initiatives that were funded through victim advocacy organizations contributed to enhanced understanding of how staged deaths and disappearances could be used for systematic exploitation, while also advancing knowledge about effective prevention strategies and therapeutic interventions for individuals recovering from discovery that their grief had been manufactured through criminal deception designed to facilitate ongoing victimization. The educational programs that were developed to raise awareness about family exploitation and staged death fraud included information about warning signs that might indicate systematic deception, legal resources available to victims of complex fraud schemes, and community protection strategies that could help vulnerable individuals and organizations recognize and resist manipulation that targeted grief and cultural trust for criminal purposes. The ongoing monitoring of criminal networks revealed that Robert Turner and Nadine's techniques were part of larger patterns involving individuals who specialized in exploiting family relationships and cultural vulnerabilities for systematic fraud, leading to enhanced prevention efforts that addressed predatory behavior patterns rather than treating individual cases as isolated incidents of personal deception or family conflict. 5 years after the conviction of Robert Turner and Nadine Laurent for their elaborate scheme involving staged death and systematic exploitation of grief, the impact of their crimes continued to influence fraud prevention efforts and victim support services throughout Florida and other states with significant immigrant populations, as the systematic changes that had been implemented in response to their case demonstrated measurable improvements in protecting vulnerable individuals from similar deception. The Michael Turner Foundation for Fraud Victims had become a leading organization, providing direct services to individuals who had been deceived by family members or intimate partners involved in staged disappearances, identity theft, and systematic exploitation of trust, while also funding research initiatives that advanced understanding of prevention strategies and therapeutic interventions for complex trauma involving betrayal by trusted individuals and family systems. The legislative achievements that resulted from advocacy efforts included enhanced penalties for crimes involving exploitation of family relationships, improved victim compensation programs that addressed long-term psychological damage caused by systematic deception, and strengthened verification requirements for insurance claims and death certificates that involved international documentation or suspicious circumstances that might indicate fraudulent representation. The international cooperation agreements that had been developed for investigating Robert Turner and Nadine's crimes evolved into permanent frameworks for addressing cross-border fraud and identity deception, with specialized units sharing intelligence about criminal techniques while also supporting diplomatic relationships that balanced sovereignty concerns with victim protection and international law enforcement cooperation. The victim support services that had been enhanced in response to advocacy efforts showed significant improvements in helping individuals recover from complex fraud and family exploitation, with increased reporting rates and successful prosecutions that reflected better training for law enforcement officers and more effective coordination between agencies responsible for investigating financial crimes and providing victim assistance. The educational impact of Michael's story extended beyond formal prevention programs to include widespread public awareness about the sophisticated nature of modern fraud schemes that exploited family relationships and cultural trust, helping potential victims recognize warning signs, while also encouraging community members to provide support when they suspected exploitation or systematic deception targeting vulnerable individuals. The policy advocacy that continued to focus on victim protection included ongoing efforts to strengthen legal remedies for individuals deceived by family members, improve coordination between agencies responsible for fraud investigation and victim support, and maintain funding for specialized services that address the complex needs of people recovering from discovery that their most trusted relationships had been exploited for criminal purposes. The research contributions that emerged from academic study of their case advanced understanding of how family dynamics could be manipulated for systematic exploitation, while also contributing to improved training programs for professionals who worked with fraud victims, enhanced prevention strategies that addressed family and cultural vulnerabilities, and more effective therapeutic approaches that balanced healing with justice priorities. The community partnerships that developed between law enforcement agencies and victim advocacy organizations created sustainable frameworks for addressing family exploitation and complex fraud schemes with culturally sensitive approaches that respected traditional values while also ensuring that victims received protection and assistance when their trust had been systematically exploited by people who should have provided care and support. The technological innovations that emerged from prevention efforts included better systems for verifying death certificates and monitoring insurance claims for suspicious patterns, enhanced coordination between databases that tracked criminal activity across jurisdictions, and improved communication protocols that enabled rapid response when systematic deception was suspected or detected. The ongoing impact of advocacy efforts extended beyond individual protection to include systematic improvements in fraud prevention, family protection services, and community education that continued to evolve in response to new criminal techniques while maintaining focus on the human cost of crimes that exploited the most fundamental relationships and cultural trust that formed the foundation of social cohesion and individual psychological security. The memorial services that were held annually in honor of all victims of family exploitation and systematic deception served multiple purposes, including honoring their suffering, raising awareness about complex fraud schemes, and maintaining political pressure for continued improvements in prevention and support services that could protect other vulnerable individuals from experiencing similar betrayal and exploitation by trusted family members and intimate partners. 10 years after Michael Turner discovered that his supposedly deceased wife was alive and living with his stepfather in a relationship built on the foundation of his manufactured grief and systematic exploitation of community sympathy, his story continues to serve as both a cautionary tale about the vulnerability of trust within families and an inspiring example of how personal devastation can be transformed into meaningful advocacy that protects other vulnerable individuals from similar exploitation by people who should provide care and support rather than predatory manipulation. The Michael Turner Foundation for Fraud Victims has become an internationally recognized institution that has directly assisted over 600 families, while also funding research and policy initiatives that have contributed to systematic improvements in fraud prevention, victim protection, and family exploitation detection across multiple states and countries where similar crimes had previously gone undetected due to sophisticated manipulation techniques and institutional weaknesses. The legislative changes that his advocacy helped achieve have been adopted across numerous jurisdictions and have contributed to more effective prosecution of family exploitation and staged death fraud, while also providing enhanced resources for victims and their families who need support, navigating complex legal systems and recovery processes that are complicated by betrayal from trusted family members and intimate partners. The international law enforcement cooperation that was essential for investigating Robert Turner and Nadine's crimes has evolved into permanent frameworks for combating sophisticated deception schemes involving family relationships, with specialized units sharing intelligence and coordinating operations that have disrupted hundreds of criminal networks, while establishing protocols for protecting vulnerable individuals from systematic manipulation and exploitation. The victim support services that were enhanced in response to his case continue to provide specialized assistance for individuals and families affected by complex fraud and family exploitation, while also contributing to enhanced understanding of effective therapeutic interventions that help survivors rebuild their capacity for trust and authentic relationships after experiencing systematic betrayal by people they loved and trusted completely. The community healing process that occurred within Miami's real estate and Haitian American communities demonstrated the resilience and solidarity that can emerge from collective victimization when groups unite to protect their most vulnerable members, while also working to educate others about the warning signs of exploitation and the importance of maintaining vigilance, even within trusted family and cultural relationships. The technological innovations that have resulted from foundation-funded research continue to provide enhanced fraud detection and prevention capabilities, while also supporting legitimate verification needs for insurance companies, law enforcement agencies that must balance security concerns with efficiency in processing legitimate claims and protecting privacy rights of individuals seeking insurance coverage and legal services. The psychological research that has grown out of Michael's case continues to advance understanding of how family relationships can be exploited for systematic criminal activity, while also contributing to enhanced knowledge about resilience factors and recovery strategies that help both potential victims recognize dangerous situations and survivors rebuild their lives after discovering that their most fundamental relationships were based on criminal deception. The relationship between Michael and Dr. Sarah Chen, the trauma counselor he eventually married 7 years after Robert Turner and Nadine's conviction, has demonstrated that authentic love and trust are possible even after experiencing devastating family betrayal, though their relationship required careful development and ongoing commitment to transparency and emotional honesty that honored both their individual healing needs and their shared commitment to building genuine partnership. The ongoing impact of his advocacy work extends beyond individual protection to include systematic improvements in family protection services, fraud prevention, and community education that continue to evolve in response to new criminal techniques, while maintaining focus on the human cost of crimes that exploit the most sacred relationships and fundamental trust that forms the foundation of psychological security and social cohesion. The story of Michael Turner serves as a permanent reminder that while family relationships represent some of humanity's most important sources of love and support, these same bonds can also be exploited by sophisticated predators who view trust and grief as opportunities for criminal exploitation rather than sacred responsibilities that deserve protection and honor. His legacy lives on through the thousands of potential victims who have been protected by the awareness programs his advocacy made possible, the hundreds of families who have received support through his foundation services, and the systematic improvements in law enforcement and victim protection that emerged from his comprehensive response to personal tragedy, ensuring that his suffering was ultimately transformed into lasting positive change that continues to benefit vulnerable individuals and families worldwide.